انتي بلادي الجميلة، حسن السلام والأمان.
طبعا رجعنا لكم مرة تانية إن شاء الله بالجزء الأول من الندوة، هل الاختبارات الجينية مفيدة للرياضيين؟ الجزء الثاني بعنوان تطبيقات النانو تكنولوجي والذكاء الاصطناعي في فسيولوجيا الرياضة. ده عنوان الندوة الرابعة. الجزء الأول انقسم لجزئين. الجزء الأول هل الاختبارات الجينية مفيدة للرياضيين؟ الجزء الثاني تطبيقات النانو تكنولوجي والذكاء الاصطناعي في فسيولوجيا الرياضة. رئيس الندوة أستاذ الدكتور سعد التائب، مقرر الندوة أستاذ الدكتور زكريا أحمد السيد، ثالث سبيكر ألان ويليامز، المتحدث الثاني أستاذ الدكتور إيهاب إسماعيل. زكريا، دكتور زكريا تعال الصوت يا دكتور.
ايوه السلام عليكم.
وعليكم السلام. الدكتور سعد موجود معانا؟ دكتور سعد؟
لا والله دكتور سعد انا مش عارف اوصل له والله للاسف يعني.
طيب اتفضل دكتور بعد اذنك.
عنده مشكله.
اتفضل يا دكتور دي الندوه بعد اذنك.
حاضر.
اتفضل دكتور.
بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. احنا بيسعدنا وبيشرفنا ان شاء الله ان احنا نستضيف كوكبه من العلماء الندوه بتاعتنا اللي احنا بنديرها كليه التربيه الرياضيه بنين، قسم العلوم الحيويه والصحيه الرياضيه. ولينا كل الشرف في ان احنا في الندوه الرابعه ان شاء الله. بيشرفنا برئاسه الندوه الاستاذ الدكتور سعد التائب، رئيس جامعه صبراتا ليبيا الشقيقه، وهو للاسف انا يعني مش قادر ان انا اوصل له، ففي عنده مشكله تقنيه انا ممكن مش قادر ما اعرفش، ممكن ان شاء الله تتحل ويدخل معانا دلوقتي يشرفنا. وبنرحب بالاستاذ دكتور ألون ويليامز من جامعه مانشستر متروبوليتان للمملكه المتحده. وانا بس عايز اوجه له شكر. I would like to welcome Professor Alun Williams to our conference. We have to honor that he will give us a lecture today. Thank you very much for being with us. وبيشرفنا وجود الاستاذ الدكتور ايهاب اسماعيل، استاذ فسيولوجيا الرياضه جامعه حلوان، وهيكلمنا ان شاء الله عن تطبيقات النانو تكنولوجي والذكاء الاصطناعي في فسيولوجيا الرياضه. والمواضيع اللي احنا بنتكلم فيها النهارده يعني فعلا بتصلح ان الباحثين اللي موجودين معانا فعلا يستفيدوا ويقدروا ان هم يعملوا مجموعه كبيره جدا من الابحاث اللي ممكن ان شاء الله تفيدنا وتقدر ان هي تدخلنا ان شاء الله عالم جديد وشغل فعلا كويس جدا. ونتمنى ان شاء الله المؤتمر بتاعنا يكون على الوجه الاكمل ويكون عالمي على حق ان شاء الله باذن الله. دلوقتي نبتدي ان شاء الله الشغل ان شاء الله. الندوه الاولى مستر ألان ويليامز. You can begin with us and welcome for you. Thank you very much.
Okay. Thank you very much for inviting me. It's a great honor to talk at your event. Of course, as I think has just been said, I work at Manchester Metropolitan University. I also have a role at University College London. The topic I've been asked to talk about is are genetic tests in sport useful for practitioners? And I will try to do that by three parts. Yes, so the three parts. The first one is about genetic contributions in sport. Secondly, I will talk about some selected gene associations. And thirdly, then try to answer that question about practical applications. To address the first point, genetic contributions in sport, we are fortunate that nature has given us a nice experimental design to try to answer this. And that is based around the existence of twins. We have, of course, on the left fraternal twins or non-identical twins, where we have two eggs fertilized by two different sperms. So we have individuals then as twins who are have the same shared genetics, the same amount of shared DNA as any other brothers or sisters. And on the right, of course, we have identical twins where a single egg is fertilized by a single sperm, and then we have two individuals that develop, and they now share, at least for the purpose of this topic, they share 100% of their DNA. So the other important point here is that within each pair of twins, of course, the environmental influences remain consistent. So within any given pair of twins, then that they have the same upbringing, they have the same household, they have similar diet, similar opportunity for sport and physical activity, and so on. And that applies that applies within a pair of twins, whether they are the fraternal twins or the identical twins. So what we have is a 100% shared genetic variance between the identical or monozygotic twins. We have 50% for the fraternal or dizygotic twins. And of course, that is then similar to other brothers and sisters or siblings, and also parents and children. And that is also used in some experiments, some experimental designs. And I will mention one of those in a moment as well. So this slide has a lot of information on it, I know, and this isn't all the information that exists. But this shows on the left, you will see the parameters or the traits or the phenotypes that have been assessed in studies that many of them are based on twins. Some are using other family members. And on the right-hand side, there are heritability estimates. So these are estimates of the genetic contribution to differences between people in the parameter that is measured on the left. So I will just pick on a few of these now. So second from the top, you will see that there is percentage fiber types. This is the proportion of skeletal muscle fiber type between fast and slow twitch. And you see on the right that there is an approximately 50% genetic contribution to differences between people in fiber types. So it's not all genetic. There's obviously an environmental component, that kind of physical activity people have done all through their life is obviously important, but there is a significant genetic component. Moving down a little, there's a pair that talk about maximal oxygen uptake and also the change in maximal oxygen uptake that occurs in response to training. So one of them is pre-training in a sort of sedentary state, and the other is in a training state. And both of them have heritabilities, again, of around 50%. A bit lower, there's one about leg strength, and that had an estimated genetic component of around 60%. And there is just below halfway, it says mesomorphy or muscularity, and also height. And both of those have estimates around 80%. So that's obviously a little stronger. And then a lot of those are sort of things that people might expect or readily accept have genetic contributions. Some people are less ready to accept that the one near the top, which says skill acquisition, that also has a significant, around 70% genetic component. So this is the way that learning new skills seems to be influenced by genetics is also quite strong. So I think I should say that a lot of these are, well, all the heritability estimates on the right-hand side are between 40 and 80%. And that is such a consistent finding. It's one of those rare things in science where pretty much everyone agrees that these things do, all the traits that we might look at in sport or exercise do have significant genetic components. Even some of the ones towards the bottom there is physical activity is mentioned, just a few from the bottom on the left. So this is the level of voluntary physical activity people do. So this is their behavior, not just their fitness level, but their actual behavior. And that also congregates according to genetic components. And even things like dietary intakes. There's dietary fruit and vegetable intake, and also the percentage of dietary energy as protein. So people are sometimes less that is more of a surprise to some people that they also have significant genetic components, but the evidence is certainly that they do. The one I mentioned about the change in maximal oxygen uptake near the top, Bouchard et al. 1999, that is shown here now. So this is the key results, key figure from the results section. And we have on the y-axis the change in VO2 max that occurs in response to 20 weeks of standardized training. And each vertical bar in the figure represents one family. So if you look at the family on the very far right-hand side, then each member of that family, and there were at least 4 members of a family took part in this study, of all the families. So each member of that family is getting a significantly above average response in terms of VO2 max to 20 weeks of endurance training. Then there are families in the middle, and on the very far left-hand side, you see a bar that represents a family where they are doing obviously exactly the same training as the family on the right, but they are getting a very low response of VO2 max. Everyone just getting a low response. So you can look at the family relationships, analyze the data, and you come out with a heritability estimate. And in this case, it was approximately 50% for how responsive people are to endurance training in terms of VO2 max. Yes, so I will, I believe we're having a brief summary there. I will pause and then I will continue. I think that's right.
Okay, yes, Alan. So I think translation will take place now. سعيد محتاجين أنا أترجم؟ دكتور زكريا.
السلام عليكم.
اتفضل. لا.
السلام عليكم.
اتفضل.
استاذن حضرتك تدخلي من اكونت واحد بس.
انا هغطي الجزء الاولاني دوت يا دكتور زكريا وانهي دكتور الان ويليامز في الجزء الاولاني من المحاضره هو تعرض للموديل الخاص بالتوائم المتماثله والتوائم غير المتماثله وازاي ده بيكون له ارتباط بعمليه التدريب الرياضي. وبعدين هو شير سلايد كان بيتكلم على المتغيرات. Alan, would you like to go back for the table, please? The first table will show the heritability and the physical parameters.
Yes, of course.
Thanks.
Good afternoon, Dr. Alun Williams.
خليني حضرتك اكمل انا الجزء دوت. هنا دكتور ألون ويليامز كان بيتكلم على بعض المتغيرات زي نسبة الألياف العضلية زي ما حضراتكم شايفين هنا، أو الحد الأقصى استهلاك الأكسجين أو مستوى العضلات، وزي ما أنتم كنتوا حضراتكم شايفين إن النسبة دي بتتراوح من 50 ل 60% ل 70%. ده بيبين إزاي العوامل دي بتتأثر بشكل كبير بعملية التدريب الرياضي. أكتر من كده كمان هو كان بيتكلم على عملية اكتساب المهارات الحركية دي اللي هي موجوده عندنا في رقم 4. قال ان اكتساب المهارات الحركيه ده بيتاثر بنسبه 70% بعمليه العوامل الجينيه والعوامل الوراثيه. قدرتك انت على اكتساب او انك تتعلم مهاره حركيه جديده 70% منها بيتوقف على العوامل الجينيه. انا can move to Bouchard study now. فيما يخص الحد الاقصى لاستهلاك الاكسجين كان دكتور ألان ويليامز هو اشار للدراسه الخاصه ببوشارد ايتال و thanks Alan. So هو كان بيتكلم على ان الخط اللي قدام حضراتكم ده بيمثل الافريج بتاع التغيرات اللي بتحصل مستوى الحد الاقصى لاستهلاك الاكسجين. وهنبص على مجموعه العائلات اللي في الاقصى اليمين دي، هنلاقي ان في مجموعه عائلات او الافراد اللي اشتركوا من عيله واحده وعندهم الجينات اللي تطور مستوى الحد الاقصى للاكسجين، هنلاقي ان المجموعه ديت هي اللي تطور عندها الحد الاقصى للاكسجين بشكل اكبر مقارنه بمجموعه ثانيه او عائلات ثانيه ما عندهمش الجينات المسؤوله عن تطور الحد الاقصى للاكسجين، فبنلاقي ان مستوى الحد الاقصى للاكسجين بالنسبه لهم اقل. وده بياكد تاني على دور الجينات في اكتساب الصفات البدنيه وكمان اكتساب المهارات الحركيه. Thanks, Alan. I think you can move into the next section.
Okay. Okay, yes. So having established that there is a significant genetic component to many of these traits and parameters, then the next question is much harder to answer is what are the particular gene associations that account for that? What are the particular gene variants that account for that? And there are two broad ideas here. The bit on the left-hand side of the diagram shows that a rare, powerful mutation can quite dramatically affect physiology, which then ultimately affects sport performance. Whereas on the right-hand side, it shows the idea where there are several common polymorphisms. So each one of these is not rare, perhaps, but maybe a particular combination of them, each of them contributing a little bit to a variable. Then they accumulate together and collectively influence sport performance. So I'll give an example of one on the left and two examples of the from the right-hand side. So the example of a rare, powerful mutation is one that a cross-country skier had from Finland. His name was Eero Mantiranta, and he had extraordinarily high hematocrit, so over 60% hematocrit. So it's a very high proportion of his blood, of course, being made up of red blood cells, due to a mutation in the erythropoietin receptor gene. So on the bottom of the screen, you can see a diagram of the gene, and there's a single letter change, just over one small element of the DNA, changed from a G to an A nucleotide, and that changes the length of the functional part of the gene, which changes the structure of the receptor protein that is created and makes it very responsive to erythropoietin, to EPO. So this skier and other members of his family had normal levels of EPO, but they were extremely responsive to it. So the response was to keep producing lots and lots of red blood cells. And I'm sure that contributed to his several gold medals that he won in endurance events in the Olympics back in the 1960s. So if that's a rare mutation, then there is an example here of a common variant. So something that is quite commonly found in 100 people, you might find several people with different types of this gene, different types of the variant. So the gene is called ACTN3, known as alpha-actinin 3, and it codes for a protein that is only found in the Z line of fast twitch skeletal muscle fibers. So the Z line, of course, is the bit here's the sort of the sarcomere of the muscle, and the Z line, the zigzag line to the right, shows it's a complex of proteins, and alpha-actinin 3 made by this gene is one of the proteins that is in that complex. And on the bottom of the screen, it shows that there are R and X versions, or they are labeled R and X versions of this gene that we all have. And of course, you inherit one from your mother and one from your father. So an individual is either an RR or an RX or an XX person. If you inherit two X alleles, so you have an XX person, then you have two non-functioning versions of that gene. And so in your Z line, you are missing one protein. But it's not a major problem because you have other genes and proteins that step in to fill the gap. But there is something then slightly different about the function and maybe even the signaling within those fast twitch fibers. In terms of sport performance, the first paper in 2003 looked at this gene, and in the middle of the figure, you see the dark bar, the black bar, represent the XX people. These are the ones that that cannot create this protein, in the middle part of the figure, it shows that the height of the black bar represents 18% of people are of this XX gene. And this is in a Caucasian population. And actually, in many African populations, that percentage is a bit lower than this, but this is in white Caucasians. To the right of the figure, that black bar gets higher, suggesting that it's perhaps advantageous to endurance performance. But perhaps more powerful is on the left-hand side of the figure, particularly on the far left. There are no individuals who are XX phenotype, so that it seems to prevent them becoming particularly highly elite at sprint and jumping kind of power events, those kind of things. And this study has been replicated many times since, so it is one that we are very sure of. It's very consistent. So if you're an XX individual, elite sprinting seems to be more difficult. One of those replications is shown here. So it's just the left-hand figure that's of interest here, not the one on the right. So in the left-hand figure, we have the three groups of people, the three genotypes. We have the RR genotype group, the RX, and the XX. And the horizontal line here, this is for 200-meter sprint times, personal bests. We have the horizontal dotted line represents the Olympic qualifying time at the time of this study. And for the XX group, they were all good sprinters. They were faster than me, but they were not able to achieve the Olympic qualifying time. Whereas of the other genotypes, some of them at least were able to do that. Yes, so there might be some individuals who are XX who can achieve Olympic qualifying times in sprint events, but it certainly seems to be much more difficult for them than for the other genotypes. Yes, I showed this figure before. This was the Bouchard figure. So it's just to say that the same group of researchers then followed up with the same individuals and started to look at the particular genetic associations that could explain these differences between these families. And they identified several genetic variants that seemed to be important. And other researchers, such as ourselves, actually have then subsequently gone to study them in other groups, like in groups of athletes. So here are some data that we've just had accepted to publish in a particular journal, where we looked at one of those. Genes that the original team identified in the non-athletes doing endurance training, and then we've looked at this in elite marathon runners. Well, in good marathon runners, not all elite, in good marathon runners. And what we have is that for this gene, the PRDM1 gene, and there's the sort of identifier of the particular variant at the bottom in the middle. What we have is that those individuals who carry at least one of the T alleles, so the lower bar, they on average have personal best marathon times around 3 minutes faster than the individuals who are of the CC genotype. So this is consistent with the previous work by Bouchard et al., where they showed that the T allele was associated with a greater response to endurance training, and here we have the end result of that in terms of final sport performance. Yes, I'll pause there for a second bit. Yeah.
اتفضل دكتور عزمي، اتفضل.
في الجزء دوت دكتور ألان ويليامز كان بيحاول ان هو يحدد بعض الجينات المسؤولة عن تطور الصفات البدنية. عندنا في الأول نموذج على أحد الرياضيين اللي هو عنده القدرة على تخليق كرات الدم الحمراء، وإزاي ده كان مرتبط بيه إن هو يحقق مستوى إنجاز اللي هو قدر يحقق 7 ميداليات أولمبية في مسابقات التحمل. الجزء الثاني اتكلم فيه على أكتا ألفا 3 بروتين، والجين دوت قال إن هو بيبقى مرتبط بعنصر السرعة، وإزاي لو أنا عندي الدبل إكس ده بيديني مستوى قليل بالنسبه لمستويات السرعه، فما بقدرش ان انا احقق الانجاز اللي بيحققني ان انا اتاهل للاولمبياد. بعد كده اتكلم على الجين اللي هو قدام حضراتكم في الصوره دوت، اللي هو ال PRDM1، والاستادي ديت كانت بصت على لعيبه الرجبي ومجموعه من اللعيبه اللي هم بيأدوا مسابقات الماراثون، ولقينا ان اللعيبه اللي بيبقى عندهم السي تي 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 دول بيبقى عندهم الامكانيه ان هم يحققوا مستوى افضل في الماراثون او مسابقات الجري بشكل عام، وارتباط الجين بصفه التحمل زي ما حضراتكم شايفين بالنسبه للانجاز الرقمي اللي هم بيجروا هنا دقيقتين 25 ساعتين و25 دقيقه، مقارنه بالناس اللي هم ما عندهمش جين او عندهم السي سي دول هنلاقي ان هم بيوصلوا لحد دقيقتين و30 ثانيه، ففي 5 ساعتين و30 دقيقه، ففي حوالي 5 دقائق فرق ما بين اللي عنده جين اللي هو السي تي او اللي هو البي ار دي ام 1 مقارنه باللي ما عندهمش، وده بيحدد بعض الجينات. يبقى انا لو هرجع ابتدي ابص على دراسه الجينات، فهناك بعض الجينات المحدده اللي انا بحاول اركز عليها وبربط هذه الجينات بعناصر محدده للبرفورمانس الرياضي زي التحمل والقوه. Yeah, thanks, Alan. You can carry on.
Okay, thanks, Asmi. Yes, so the final part is yes, practical applications. So research groups like our own and others, we're quite proud, I suppose, of some of the research findings we do have, but it is quite different to look back at data sets and look at selected genetic variants. That is quite different from prediction of the future with people's talent or their sport performance. So the question is, well, how well can that be done? We looked at this in most detail a few years ago. There's quite a list of names there. Many of the researchers that spend their whole careers looking at this topic, and it's interesting that none of us offer genetic tests from our institutions. You would think that if these tests were really useful, we would probably be doing that ourselves, but we do not do that. Genetic tests are, of course, available from genetic testing companies, private companies. So we evaluated what they offered in this paper that we published as well. The companies tend to make many claims. They talk about, they claim that the results, genetic test results, can help you personalize your training based on your sport genetic results. They claim that it will give parents and coaches early information on their child's genetic predisposition for success in team or individual speed, power, or endurance sports. So those kind of claims that all the companies make those claims. The companies are here. We identified 39 of them, and we looked in detail at which genes they tested and what claims they made. And there were several problems with them in our we all agreed that there were several problems with them. First of all, more than half the companies did not even disclose what tests they were going to do. They would just take your money and not tell you which genes they were going to test. Secondly, they would make exaggerated claims, as we said, about that the science did not justify, and they only tested a few genetic variants, on typically around 6. And there were also questions about, could they even do the tests properly? Just the lab tests, the quality control. There's some evidence that some of them could not. They sometimes would then give questionable genetic results and then follow that up with supposedly personalized nutritional advice and sell those products as well, and that was questionable. And there were also problems with how they gained consent and how they actually communicated the results to people. So there were obviously many problems in our opinion, and I think it's illustrated really well by this example. I'm not sure. So my slides are coming up in phases. I think maybe you have the whole slide all at once. But this is an example report that was available on the website from one of the genetic testing companies, and they had an individual who they classified as an endurance type athlete, with about 57% of their genetics making them an endurance athlete and 43% making them a speed or power athlete. They tested several genetic variants, the kind of like the ones like ACTN3 that I've been mentioning, so ones that are quite all the usual ones that we research and that we write about. But it was interesting that the individual they tested was called Brian Habana, who now I'm a bit of a rugby fan and I do some of my research in rugby. Brian Habana is one of the most famous African rugby players ever. Played on the wing as a sprinter for the South African team, and was so famous that they did several they sort of did promotional events where he would race against a cheetah because he was so fast. So he was certainly a power or speed athlete and not an endurance athlete, and the genetic test was giving him almost the opposite result, and this was on the website of the company that was trying to sell the tests, which is really quite something. So I think you can see that I don't have a great opinion of these tests. So I think the reason why those tests are poor is summarized here. So for any trait in sport and exercise, in sport, then there's approximately, it can vary a little, but it could be approximately a 50% genetic component and a 50% environmental component. The genetic component is on the right-hand half of this figure, but the known genetic, the bits of genetics that we do understand, are this small dark blue bit at the bottom. Most of the other genetics that we know is out there somewhere, we do not know what that is. So when these genetic testing companies give a report, they are basing it on the little bit of genetics that is established, but they make no reference to the fact that most of the genetics is unknown. So it's not surprising that in some cases someone will get a report saying that they are more suited to endurance type activity, but actually the other hidden genetics that hasn't been tested by the company would actually say that the truth is perhaps that they are more suited to speed and power events. So I think that illustrates it well. These, as time goes on, the amount of unknown genetics will reduce, but we are certainly not there yet. So in conclusion, then, the three parts of my talk, genetic factors certainly do have a substantial influence on sport performance, and many genetic variants are responsible, and we know some of them, but the majority we do not know. So the conclusion is that most genetic tests are really not yet useful for practical application in sport. I have brief acknowledgements to many people at Manchester Metropolitan University that have worked on some of the things I presented today, and other key collaborators in other institutions as well. So thank you very much for letting me speak to you. I'm happy to take any questions if we have time.
Thank you very much. دكتور عزمي.
دكتور زكريا، استاذن عليك ان المترجمه هتدخل دلوقتي بس تترجم الجزء ده. اتفضلي حضرتك.
اتفضل يا دكتور.
معكم المترجمة الفورية مرقصي أمينة من جامعة محمد لمين دباغين، تخصص علوم وتقنية النشاطات البدنية والرياضية. إذن كما يقول الدكتور أنه وبناء على معرفتنا في ببعض الجينات وارتباطها بالأداء الرياضي، يبقى السؤال يدور حول إمكانية استخدام وتطبيق هذه المعرفة ميدانياً. ففي حالة إيجاد ارتباطات بين العينات والأداء، تبقى هنالك مشكلة ترجمتها إلى أداة عملية قد تساعد المدرب والرياضي على حد سواء للوصول إلى أعلى مستوى تسمح به قدراته وإمكانياته. وتبرز المشكلة الرئيسية في أن معظم المتغيرات الجينية المسؤولة لا تزال غير معروفة بعد. وفي هذا الصدد يقول الدكتور ألون ويليامز: حتى ولو قمنا بتقييم الجينات التي نعرفها، فيمكن أن تكون الجينات المخفية والغير معروفة بعد فائقة في ارتباطها بالأداء الرياضي. مما لا شك فيه أن السنوات الأخيرة شهدت ارتفاعاً ملحوظاً من قبل العديد من الشركات التي تدعم خدمة فحص الحمض النووي وتقديم تقرير وراثي حوله في مدى ملائمة كل رياضي مع حدث رياضي ما، أو نوع التدريب المعتمد، أو حتى النظام الغذائي المتبع، ولا يكون ذلك طبعاً بدون مقابل. ورغم أن هذا الموضوع أصبح محط جدل واسع، فإن فكرة الاعتماد على المعلومات الجينية بغية معرفة قدرات وسلوكات الشخص تعد فكرة مثيرة للغاية من الناحية العلمية. وعلى غرار ذلك ينصح الدكتور ألون ويليامز بأخذ الحيطة حول هذه الشركات والتقارير المقدمة من طرفها، حيث يرى أن هذه الشركات قد تزعم المثالية في نتائجها وترفض بذلك الاعتراف بالحدود النظامية للاختبارات الجينية التي تقوم بها. ويختم الدكتور ألون ويليامز بنصيحة علمية في المجال الرياضي، وهي استثمار الأموال التي عوض أن توجه إلى هكذا شركات ربحية توجه لخدمة جوانب أخرى في علوم أو ميدان الرياضة للوصول بذلك إلى مثالية الأداء الرياضي. وفي الأخير يتشكر الدكتور ألون ويليامز جميع المنظمين والمشاركين في هذا الحدث العلمي المتميز، آملا أن تكون هنالك محافل حضورية للإفادة والاستفادة أكثر.
شكرا جزيلا